Well, this is going to be a good hour.
Oh, yeah.
Because Andrew Brank and I love self-defense. We get along really well on the radio. And we've been playing radio tag for Andrew. Welcome in. What's it been? A couple weeks now, I think, my friend?
Yeah, trying to get things organized. I'm sorry. I've been unbelievably busy and just a complicated schedule.
Never apologize. Never apologize for being busy. You can give me a boatload too when I reach out to you an hour before and say, hey, how about today? What's the schedule looking like? It just kind of works that way. Andrew, there's a lot going on. And I've enjoyed reading a lot of your emails lately. And I have 4 of them that I want to cover with you today. And I think the real place that we should start would be Israel, because you have, and I guess you did this on your podcast. I've not had a chance to listen to it, but Israel Massacre and Second Amendment date forever. So let's talk a little bit about that. Tell us your thoughts on what happened over there, what is ongoing over there, and some of your thoughts on, well, how that should actually end the Second Amendment debate. And then we'll go down into the weeds.
Well, the poor Israeli on their kibbutz were simply helpless when they were confronted by armed people because the Israelis had no arms. The government doesn't allow it. They're stored in central armories. And when people show up with AKs and you've got nothing, you just die. And they were slaughtered like animals in a pen. It was terrible. Now, they might have lost their lives anyway, even had they been armed. You never know. But they would have had a chance, and they would have exacted a cost, and nobody would have been kidnapped and raped because they would have died there in their homes.
That reminds me, when you said at least they would have had a chance, Susanna Hupp, a good friend of mine, you know her from the Massacre and Luby's. And Susanna has, when she testified on the Hill and stuck it to Chuck Schumer and the rest of them back in the 90s, it was really a sight to see. And her book, From Luby's to the Legislature, she went on to be a Texas state legislator. I sat on the Stossel show at Fox News in New York on site when we taped a live episode, and her and I and Nikki Goza were on the same panel. And John Stossel looked at her, and I'll never forget this. And he said, if you had your gun, I'll do it my Stossel way. If you had your gun on your person instead of in the truck, would it have made a difference? That's the best Stossel I can do now. And she said, I don't know, but I know it would have changed the odds. And I think that's what you were referring to, right?
Yeah. And of course, it also changes the algorithm for the attacker, right? They're not just walking into a group of unarmed, helpless people that they can just gun down at their leisure. They're getting shot at too. That makes things a bit more difficult.
So let's go into that for just a second, because there is a strong possibility that their entire tactic may have changed, that they might not have done what they did had they known, as the old saying goes here in the United States, you can't attack the United States. There would be a gun behind every blade of grass.
Right. There should have been, armed residents in every kibbutz once the alarm went out. But once the alarm went out, they couldn't do anything. They had to hide in their homes, and then their homes were burned down around them.
There's a heroic story of a heroic woman who, and I think I've been able to confirm it. I've seen it around, but she was able to get to the armory and pass out rifles. She single-handedly killed between 5 and 10 herself.
Sure. Now multiply her times 1,000. If they didn't have to go to an armory, if everyone had that weapon in their home.
Now, I didn't realize this, Andrew, and it sounds like you did. I thought Israelis were more heavily armed than they were. I didn't realize until just last week or early this week that only 2% of the population lawfully has firearms, because I thought everybody did IDF after high school, 2 years.
They do.
I thought they were able to take their weapons home. I thought every home was armed.
No. I mean, people who may be subject to recall, I'm not sure what the situation is with them, but the people who've done their service and it's done, Israel has very much a European type gun control scheme. So, or I should say New York. I guess I could say a New York type gun control scheme.
All right. So let's take a little bit deeper dive. Because
and by the way, we should expect to have exactly the same form of attacks here in the U.S. We've got millions of people who've come over the southern border in the last few months alone, and to imagine that none of them are bad actors intent on organized harm to the United States and its residents would be naive in the extreme. They're here.
Utterly foolish. They're already here. We know it, and they're here in a lot larger numbers than they were in Israel. it's frightening to think about. It really, truly is. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is why we tell you never give up your guns, ever. And you're seeing that echoed across the social media, the Twitter sphere. Politicians are saying it, vocally saying it. And now, when you say this should end the Second Amendment debate forever, I agree with you. But I want you to explain to listeners why, and can it, will it? Is this a watershed moment in the United States? We know it should be.
Right. And of course it won't be. And we see that in some of these Federal Circuit appellate court decisions that are coming out. I covered one just the other day. The Ninth Circuit in particular, on dealing with the California standard capacity magazine ban, is just an open rebellion against the Supreme Court, and the Bruin decision and the Heller decision and the McDonald decision. The lower courts, the trial courts, and the 3-judge appellate panels, every once in a while, even in the Ninth Circuit, come out with Second Amendment favorable rulings. But then the Ninth Circuit does what they call hearing it en banc. They set up a larger group of Ninth Circuit appellate judges to hear it, and they just spew out these opinions that are nothing but word salad, that completely ignore the analytical framework the Supreme Court has demanded that they apply. And they just sustain these bans. It's a joke.
Well, Hochul, ladies and gentlemen, is claiming victory. I know you know this. When the Supreme Court, the second go around, Sotomayor refused to stay some of or all of the New York, the safer concealed care, whatever it is. I forgot what it is now, what she calls her act. I'm pulling a Biden there, but the concealed carry, the post-Bruin tantrum fit that they threw.
Right. Where they made everything a sensitive location.
Everything a sensitive location. You can't carry a gun anywhere, essentially, if you're actually following the law in New York, which is going to lead me to another question from you, and I already know the answer, but I want listeners to hear it, because I think the time is coming. It may already be here. And for many people in the United States, it is. I'm teasing that right now. Listeners will go to that after the break. But the Supreme Court, in this case, Thomas refused to stay, and Hochul made a statement yesterday. I can find it and read it when we come back in the next segment of this hour. But she's claiming that the Supreme Court just handed them another victory. What is the Supreme Court's? What's their MO here? Are they just waiting for another case before they get involved? They have to know that these people are thumbing their nose right at them.
Yeah, they do. Whether they'll do anything about it. I mean, the truth was, Heller was almost 10 years ago now. I'd have to take a look at the decision. I don't remember what year it was off the top of my head.
08.
Okay.
08.
So Heller, and then a couple years later, McDonald. And for all the intervening years, the federal appellate courts that wanted to simply be in open rebellion against those decisions just made whatever rulings they want. And the trouble is, then they'll stay whatever the law is, or they'll suspend the stay of the law's anti-Second Amendment, so it remains in effect, like they just did in California with their magazine ban. Mm-hmm. And it takes years now to get certiorari back up to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court issues another ruling that they ignore for another 5 or 8 years. I mean, we would never accept this with respect to any other enumerated right in the Constitution.
When we come back from the break, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask Andrew Branca some pointed questions relative to what you should do. And keep this in mind. Here's a little teaser. Where is your line in the sand? We'll talk about that with Andrew Branca. His website, lawofselfdefense.com, and it's a good one. If you're not on his email list, you're making a mistake. We'll be back with Andrew right after this. Carry a gun so you're hard to kill. Know the law so you're hard to convict. Love that. One of the best slogans out there. Andrew, welcome back. Tell people about the site, how to get on the mail list, because it's really cool stuff.
Probably the best thing I can recommend is, of course, our website is lawofselfdefense.com. But if you go to lawofselfdefense.com/free book, we'll send you a free copy of our book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles. Check it out on Amazon. It's 5-star rated, but don't buy it there. They'll charge you for the book and shipping and handling. We do ask that you cover the shipping and handling, but we'll give you the book for free at lawofselfdefense.com/free book.
Could you get any more honest? Don't buy it at Amazon, which you make money for as an author. I know that as an author myself. I mean, that's the real deal, ladies and gentlemen. You can't. That's one of the best books out there. Your book and More Guns, Less Crime, now in its 3rd edition, I think, are the 2 Bibles out. And Mossad Ayoub's, of course, we can't miss In the Gravest Extreme. But those 3 books they're Bibles, man.
Mossad wrote the foreword to my book. It was very kind of him.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, he wrote the foreword to my first book too. We just love Massad Ayoob. Massad Ayoob is just a wonderful man. We love. See, that's pretty good. You know that's good too. Yeah. That sounds just like him. In fact, he says, you don't have to have me as a guest. Just imitate me, ask questions, and answer them yourself. You know what I'm going to say. But anyway, let's go back now to because I have to ask this question. When you have, I could say courts, governors, individual legislators, when you have an anti-gun establishment, let me put it that, in everything that encompasses, literally snubbing their nose at the Supreme Court of the United States, that says lots to me. It says it is utter disrespect for the rule of law. It says it is utter disrespect for our form of government, our institutions. It is disrespect for our Bill of Rights, our Constitution. I could go on and on and on. It's very dangerous. And I tell people, Andrew, all the time, ask them to think, where's their line in the sand? You get to a place like New York or a place like California, particularly on the heels of what we've seen in Israel. New York has the largest Jewish population in the world outside of Israel. At what point do Americans say, enough? Well, she does not have the moral authority to tell me that I can't defend myself. And I know as an attorney what you're going to say, but let's go there.
I mean, the truth is that because we're a nation of 50 states, people who live in those states who feel the oppression of tyranny with those fascist gun laws, they largely move. I mean, New York State and California are bleeding people by the hundreds of thousands. And so those people have a safety valve. They can go to states where their Second Amendment rights are respected. Unfortunately, a lot of times when those people leave, they bring bad politics along with them. Colorado's become, just another version of California in the 5 years I've lived here.
Right.
It hasn't made the gun laws worse yet, I don't think, recently. But we have our own 15-round magazine ban here.
You say that with trepidation. You say that with
no, I've got one foot out of the state. I mean, Nashville, Tennessee is looking pretty darn good to me.
I don't blame you. And it's so sad because where you live is so beautiful. Aesthetically, it's absolutely beautiful. But please continue. So
people so far have had a safety valve. And even in places like California, when we get a decision like Heller, McDonald, Cateno, Bruin, people have a sense that things could get better. And I don't know why. It's almost like they're in like an abusive domestic relationship. They think the abuser is going to change. The abuser is not going to change. Unless somebody compels the change. I don't know how clear the Supreme Court has to be. With this California magazine ban fiasco, with the Ninth Circuit just giving the Supreme Court the finger, the truth is, with respect to the magazine ban, we don't even need Bruin. I mean, that should have been tossed out under Heller. And Heller was 2008. And it's still around. In fact, they've made it worse over time. They've made it so you can't even keep the magazines you used to have. They're not grandfathered anymore. But nobody's stopping them.
What about some of the vagueness? What about some of the vagueness in some of the rulings? We could go to Scalia in Heller. Just this vague, sensitive places. I mean, this is what the vultures are circling around and claiming. Well, I'll just create sensitive places everywhere, and I'm within the scope of the SCOTUS decision.
Right, and
we see the same thing here.
Right. So there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, for one thing, SCOTUS is kind of presuming that the lower courts and the legislatures are going to be reasonable people. They should know better. Another problem, of course, is to get a majority on the Supreme Court, you need at least five. And so not everyone feels as strongly about the Second Amendment as Scalia did, as Thomas does. So you end up having to compromise with other justices so you can get that 5 majority. The truth is, the Supreme Court should simply say, every gun control law on the books, every single one of them that's preemptively applied to law-abiding, mentally sound American citizens is unconstitutional. Magazine bans, the NFA, everything, if it's being preemptively applied to law-abiding, mentally sound people, should be facially unconstitutional, period.
Well, Bruin provides us, and I'm guilty of it. When the Bruin decision came down, I was actually on my way up to tour a couple distilleries on the Bourbon Trail with my wife when I got a phone call from Alan saying it's out. And my wife spent the next 45 minutes reading me the decision as we were driving up the highway into Kentucky.
And it's a good decision.
And I felt it was a great decision, and I felt somewhat vindicated. Yes, this is strong. Until I realized, well, not when people are going to ignore it. So if they're going to ignore it, why don't we ignore them?
Well, you can't because they'll put you in federal prison or their state prisons.
You got to get caught first, right?
Yeah, but it becomes a conundrum, right? So first of all, it makes you easy prey for the kind of ATF stings that we've seen them operate, ever since Ruby Ridge. And, people don't want to be vulnerable to a 10-year federal felony in prison. And we know they'll do it because just look at what they're doing to the January 6th protesters, right? You're their political enemies. They will throw everything at you. They'll try you in Washington, D.C., where the juries are going to return 100% guilty verdicts, no matter what the facts or the Constitution has to say about anything. And maybe in 10 or 15 years, there'll be a change in the political winds and there'll be another Donald Trump as president. And maybe he'll pardon some people. Who knows? But people have families and they have jobs and careers and aspirations. They don't want to spend that time in prison. And of course, if they feel that strongly about it, they can move.
So let's go to New Mexico. Perfect segue here. And then we'll go back to Israel because it fits. We've got 30 seconds, so I'll throw this out now. And then when we come back from the break, we'll hand the mic to you. But New Mexico was a prime example, I thought anyway, of this ain't going to fly around here, law dog. I don't feel like letting you arrest me today, Sheriff Behan.
No, it's very liberal.
When you had the governor unilaterally suspend the Second Amendment inside the borders of Albuquerque, and 3 powerful and prominent Democrats swiftly responded, no, I don't think so. Even the likes of that idiot David Hogg said, no, I don't think so. It's almost like a light bulb went off because I watched them make every argument I've made on this show for 15 years. And then it just kind of dwindled away and went away because the media doesn't want to cover it anymore. We'll check in with Andrew about it when we come back.
I don't think I'll let you arrest us today, Behan.
Andrew Branca, welcome back. Lawofselfdefense.com. Lawofselfdefense.com. And as Andrew mentioned, you buy the book over there. You don't have to buy it. You pay for the shipping. We'll send you the book for free. Don't buy it at Amazon. Go over there and get on that list. Believe me, these emails you want to see. This is great stuff. Andrew, welcome back. I mentioned Grisham in New Mexico. Fascinating. I think outside the 3 Supreme Court cases, I've made this public. I think this is the biggest story I've ever covered in between 15 and 20 years of doing this because of the reaction to her clearly unconstitutional order and the response from Democrats who made our argument within minutes of that order. The sheriff, very powerful statement. The DA saying, nope, not going to do it. And the AG saying, yeah, no, it's unconstitutional. And by the way, I'm not going to defend you in court. Very powerful stuff. And the reaction across the country was swift and huge, which throws a little bit of weight behind Bruen and puts the gun grabbers on their heels, hence why they remain silent throughout the process, still haven't said anything and won't. But even some in the mainstream media realize that.
Well,
your thoughts on what happened?
I was covering that when it happened and when those statements were being made, particularly by the Attorney General of the state, because they did away with qualified immunity in New Mexico. So the governor would be subject to personal lawsuits for infringing her residents' rights. But I think she made a small modification to the law, but I think it's actually still on the books. And I believe it was brought to federal court to try to get an injunction, and the injunction was denied. So
that was let's get for the sake of listeners, if you haven't been following along, she was partially successful because what she did was she pared that down, and her order now is parks. Can't carry in parks.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that was upheld as it moves through the courts.
Right. Fair enough.
While it's not, you can still carry, just not in parks. Okay. But we saw people defy
Which
her.
makes no sense, of course.
I don't think it's going to be enforced. Right. I don't think it's going to be enforced. Not after what we saw.
Yeah.
But she can feel good about it because, there was no injunction put into place. It stays in effect. Yay for me while it works its way through the court. But the reaction from across the country was swift, brother. I mean, swift and hardcore. Were you surprised by it? And what does that mean because here we go back, this is where I segue back to Israel. This should end the Second Amendment debate.
Yeah, I was surprised because normally the anti-gunners operate in complete lockstep with each other. You don't normally see a breach in the barriers like this. So that was nice to hear. And presumably a reflection of the voters in New Mexico. I mean, all of these other people are elected positions. They have to run for re-election. And I guess they didn't want to adopt the governor's position. I believe she might be term limited. So the political dynamics don't mean anything to her. She can't run anyway, if that's the case. So she's free of being held accountable for her political decisions, but these others are not. And because they can still be held accountable by the voters, I mean, that's the only way to keep these politicians in check, is to make them believe that they will be held politically accountable for violating our constitutional rights. There's nothing they love more than those positions of power that they have. And anything that threatens them will calm them right down.
Yeah, and I feel pretty confident saying that Newsom is pretty confident, knowing that there won't be a majority backlash in the state of California.
Right.
So he feels comfortable in doing what he does. Hochul the same way. But you get outside of their power base, which is the cities, and the rest of those states are bright red. What's it going to take?
Well, it would take courts, federal courts, that want to apply Bruin as it's written in its plain language. Bruin effectively will eliminate almost all gun control laws as we know them. Because most of the gun control laws we have today can't meet the standards of Bruin. The standards of Bruin are that you need to look at the history and tradition of gun regulation in America and find a law from just after the adoption of the Bill of Rights or just after the Civil War, when the Bill of Rights became incorporated against the states, that was a similar statute with a similar purpose. And there are none. There's no examples for any of these gun control laws. Now, there were laws, both in the Revolutionary and the Civil War period, that said if someone is demonstrably dangerous, you can take away their Second Amendment rights. We don't want dangerous people to have guns. That's always been the rule. But there's never been laws about these red flag types of laws, or these magazine capacity limit laws, or these gun roster laws. There's zero history and tradition for any of that in America. And so all those laws, if they're challenged on that Bruin basis, have to go away. And to the extent that some of these laws are absolute bans, like the California, the courts define the magazine as a firearm for purposes of this legal discussion. And California has an absolute ban on normal capacity magazines. That is a violation of the Constitution simply under Heller from 2008. We don't even need to get to Bruin to determine that to be unconstitutional.
Well, we're at Bruin, and I'm going to assume that Thomas knows everything you just said, which is why he worded the opinion the way he did, likely knowing that Hochul's and Newsom's and others like Grisham would defy him. He knew that. And he set the courts up for future cases to rule as you just laid out. Would that be why he wrote the decision he did? And my gosh, is he angry when he sees what's happening? He's human. He's got to be.
He ought to be. I mean, he believes in the rule of law, obviously. The trouble for us, Mark, is, we're putting a lot of weight on a handful of people on the Supreme Court. I mean, what happens if, heaven forbid, Biden gets elected again and he puts another couple of Sotomayors on the court? You think Heller, McDonald?
Even worse, a trifecta in the House and Senate.
Right. So
now we have a problem.
Right. So it's we're in a precarious situation, and I mean, millions, hundreds of millions of Americans own firearms, and it becomes a function of how hard they're willing to fight politically for their rights.
Yeah, I'd like to say, I wish I could sit here and tell you that every gun owner in America would fight like you fight, like I fight, like Armed American Radio listeners fight. But I know that's not the case, or we wouldn't have that situation in Washington State or in Oregon or California or New York. A
big problem we have, and I don't see any solution to this, unfortunately, but many people don't think about it. But the majority of voters in America are women. Women are a majority of the population. And women by nature tend to value security, even a false sense of security, more than they do liberty. They'd rather be safe than have the country have more freedom. And that's because of, again, evolutionary biology, right? Women have to raise the babies. They're back at the village. It's the men going out, doing the hunting and the war fighting, taking those kinds of risks. Women are designed to want to minimize risks given the responsibilities that they have. And so when a majority of your population value security over liberty, you get these kinds of laws.
Yeah, and now we can juxtapose that with the fastest growing demographic, minorities and women that are buying guns. So there's that. We have one more segment with Andrew Branca. We're going to try to cover as much ground as possible, have a couple individual cases we want to ask him about for your listening pleasure. We'll be right back. Andrew Branca, welcome back, my friend. We have one more segment with you.
Okay.
Let's move over to a couple of the emails that I've gotten from you because I find these fascinating. I want to start with the Brooklyn. We saw the guy get stabbed in Brooklyn on the video. It was horrific. Now, he was unarmed, but I watched that video over and over and over again. He had ample time, had he been armed, to utilize, draw, and in a timely manner, defend himself with a firearm. It turns out he's a leftist Antifa supporter, would have never done that. But removing that from the equation, he had time. And there's a part of me that says, you can't do that in New York because Hochul has made sure that you can't. What's more important, her or being alive? I mean, that's the question I ask myself and I ask New Yorkers to think. And I'm not, you kind of covered that before about, does somebody want to be the test case? I got to tell you, I think that guy, if you were to tell him what was going to happen in 10 minutes, maybe he's not a good example, but someone else who might have been killed would say, yeah, okay, if you can wake me up and we can get a do-over mulligan here, I think I'm going to carry a gun this time and I'll worry about facing those consequences alive, right?
Yeah, I mean, they can do that. Of course, Hochul, for the governor, the balance is not between her gun control laws and her life. Her life is protected by armed security. The balance is between her gun control laws and your life. And she favors her gun control laws over your life. That's explicit in the whole New York gun control scheme. In terms of this guy on the sidewalk who got stabbed, the truth is, Mark, he just did everything wrong. Everything. He was not situational aware. When he realized he was on that bad guy's radar screen, he didn't set boundaries. He obviously had not a gun, zero means to defend himself against that attack. Then turns around, runs straight into the bench, falls over, and gets stabbed to death. I mean, he was as helpless as a kitten there because he had not prepared either mentally or physically for any means to defend himself. There was no pepper spray. There was no knife, obviously no gun. By his posture and the way he was flailing his arms around, he has no barehanded defense abilities at all. And he paid for that failure to meet his adult responsibilities to be capable of resisting criminal predation. He failed in that responsibility and it cost him his life.
Yeah, and I'm going to go as far as saying, because I talked about this with listeners. You guys remember this when we were talking about it last week or early this week. I've lost track of time, but nonetheless, we discussed this aspect of it. He walked into it. Instead of grabbing his girlfriend and going across the street, let's avoid this situation, he continued to walk towards it. Maybe that's a product of living in New York because you see wackos in New York like that, you just become immune to it.
Well, listen, I've lived in New York. Bed-Stuy at 4 a.m. may as well be Beirut in war. Everybody you see must be assumed to be either a killer or a victim waiting to happen.
Yeah, he did. He handled that wrong. He could have easily walked away and gone the other direction, said, honey, let's get the hell out of Dodge. He did not. When can we use pepper spray offensively?
Well, you mean defensively, in self-defense?
Or defensively, yes, because it was used. You talk about the terrifying moment when OC spray is used offensively.
Right, because someone used it, in that case, in an aggressive manner. He wasn't defending himself. He was just spraying someone he was angry with. And obviously, that's just an unlawful use of force. That's just a battery via chemical agent on another person. He paid the ultimate price for doing that. He ended up getting shot and killed right where he stood, basically. But you should never be using pepper spray offensively. That's not its purpose. And in fact, I would argue that we all think of pepper spray as non-deadly force. That's true when it's being used defensively because you're using it to stop a threat. And when the threat is neutralized, when they're no longer aggressing against you, a lawful defender who used a pepper spray doesn't continue using force on that person. The threat's neutralized. The fight's over as far as they're concerned. But when someone uses pepper spray offensively, and they do it to facilitate robberies. They do it to facilitate particularly bank robberies. They'll go in there with the giant bear bear can size things of mace, and they'll spray everyone down to facilitate their ability to rob the bank. I would suggest when someone's using OC spray offensively, it's reasonable to presume that they intend to continue using unlawful force on you. They're not spraying you to run away. They're spraying you to harm you more. And that makes it a deadly force attack, an attack likely to cause serious bodily injury when that pepper spray is being used offensively against an innocent person.
And great advice. Now, a masked aggressor arguing with two men appears to pretend to be presenting a knife when one of his two victims decides to take decisive action against the mere appearance of the threat. Is that lawful?
It is if the perception of the deadly force threat is a reasonable perception. It doesn't have to be correct. We're not required to make perfect decisions in self-defense. We're required to make reasonable decisions in self-defense. And this comes up a lot in police situations where a suspect points an apparent gun at the police, and then, of course, the police point their own guns back and they kill the suspect. And it turns out the suspect's gun was a facsimile or a replica or a BB gun. It wasn't a real firearm.
Or a cell phone. Right?
Or it could be a cell phone if it's presented in the same manner, arm motions that one would present a handgun. What matters is not whether there was actually a deadly force threat against the officers. What matters is if the officers reasonably perceived that there was a deadly force threat. If the perception is reasonable, well, you're allowed to respond to what you reasonably perceive to be the threat. And if it appears to be deadly force, you can use deadly force in self-defense.
And Andrew, sadly, I'm going to throw this out and I'll let you end the hour on this note. It largely depends on where you live in today's day and age, doesn't it? And what state you live in and what laws that these people are operating under.
The legal standard is the same all over America. Reasonable perception is enough. The trap is it's not your judgment of reasonableness that controls your legal outcome. It's other people. It's a judge, a jury, a prosecutor. It's their decision about reasonableness that controls whether or not you go to prison. And of course, you don't know what they're going to decide in the moment you're defending yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that you're going to get a different response from an Alvin Bragg than you would, or someone in Fulton County,
for sure,
than you would in a conservative area. So, ladies and gentlemen, use your heads when you're out there. Keep your head on a swivel. Don't find yourself in a situation. Best way to avoid this is to avoid it altogether. It's that simple. Andrew Branco, Law of Self-Defense. Thank you for being here, man.
Sure, Mark. Talk soon.
You on the program. You bet. Thanks for taking time out of your very busy schedule. And boy, let me tell you.
All right, Andrew, you're clear. Thank you
so
much.
All right, thank you, man. Bye-bye.
See you, man.